Subroutines and functions in Visual Basic. We'll be using temperature conversion to illustrate how to use subroutines and functions. Right. So we want to write a program that enables a person to convert between Fahrenheit and Celsius. Previously we used subroutines and a console program. Now we are going to use functions and a console program. While we are doing this, you should be able to understand the difference between functions and subroutines. So let's look at our previous example where we used subroutines, and then we would look at how we turn those into functions. In our first two examples, we showed that we could put variables that are defined globally, right? And for the subroutine to use it, that means we must assign data to the module or global variables before calling the subroutine, so the subroutine can use it. Of course, the subroutine, whatever it stores the data in, when we finish calling the subroutine, we would have to retrieve the data from that variable. So for example, for Celsius to Fahrenheit, we put the value into our Celsius, the module with variable Celsius, call the subroutine, and remember that subroutine assigned the data into Fahrenheit, so we could retrieve it when we were done. Right. In the second example of using subroutines, we actually use parameters. This means we define variables within the open close brackets, just not without the dim, just Celsius as, meaning we could use the subroutine just as we use in mathematics, h equals f of x. Right. But in this case, we would say our Celsius to Fahrenheit would be whatever we wanted. So this would do the calculation. But remember, after this is called, the data will be stored in Fahrenheit, so we would have to retrieve it, and we have that here. Right. That means we did not have to assign to Celsius to get it there. Right. And in fact, if we assign to Celsius, the subroutine wouldn't get it, because the subroutine is saying the way I get my Celsius is for you to pass it in brackets for me to use. Right. So that is how we pass data into a subroutine or function using parameters. So this is a parameter, that's a parameter. You can have more than one parameter, of course, just comma separate them, and then of course have other, well, comma, maybe name as string, comma, you can add more into there. Alright, so let's make new ones, but this time we're going to turn them into functions. Alright, so I have two more modules with different names. Well, if you have different modules, you can actually pick which of your mains to pick, well, to start with. Just right click on your project, properties, and start up object, pick which one. So I want to use my function module to start this project. So I save it, and just to show that that's the one running, I'll say using functions version 1. Right. I'm just printing that so you know it's different from the other. Well, just to show it's different from the others. The others are not printing anything when they start, just normal subroutines. But for the function, I'm just letting it print so you know that's the version we are working with. Program using functions version 1. Alright, and of course currently it has subroutines, but we're going to remove the subroutines and replace them with functions. Right. Now the only difference between a subroutine and the function is the word function. That's it. So that's the difference. But the other main difference is a function has to return something. It has to return a value. Right, because the whole idea is just like in mathematics. If you have a function g of x, you expect g of x does something in there. Maybe g of x could be equal to x plus 3, right? That means that this would actually have been function g x as integer, end function, and this can simply say dim result as integer, right? Result equals x plus 3 and return result. So that's actually how these functions work. This is the mathematics one. So of course in mathematics you just know, oh yeah, I'm doing some calculation, I need to return the result. So if someone says h is equal to g of x, that's how it is. But if you're using code and you wrote this, that means h equals g of x would work as well, because it would take the parameter, do whatever is happening in there, and return the result. So a function, unlike a subroutine, has to return a result, right? And of course, returning 0 or returning, in this case, the code hasn't changed that much, and it would work, except we are not really using the full capabilities of the function. We expect to use a function as h is equal to g of x, that is, assign what the function is returning into something. So this is a cheap way to use a function, not utilizing what it's actually capable of doing. Right. So let's modify this program so that we can actually be able to assign the result. In order to assign the result, we'll just say return Fahrenheit, right? Or in this case, return Celsius. That means whatever I'm working with, return it. Now, if I'm returning, it also means I don't have to rely on the global or the module variable. I can have my own Fahrenheit. And of course, in this case, I can have my own Celsius. Yeah, this has to be renamed. It's wrong spelling. S. Alright. And that means I don't need these globally. So you're wondering, if I don't have those globally, how do I actually, well, let's do it in steps. So I'll just keep them global for now, just so I just do this in steps. So this is a function. In order to get data, and since I'm not using parameters, it will come in that someone assigns something to Fahrenheit, the global Fahrenheit. This over here is the global Fahrenheit. It's not defined within this. And this over here is the global Celsius. It's not defined here. It's defined in the module. But Fahrenheit is defined here, and I can return that. Right. So let's modify our code to do that. That means instead of saying getting the variable into a global and bringing it back, because the function is returning it, I can actually simply just say that function is equal to, right? And this is, of course, very much similar to the h equals g of x scenario. Right? That means we can use code the same way we use mathematics, assign one thing to another. In this case, a function does something and we assign it. So that's the assignment. You've actually seen this previously in console.readline. Console.readline is a function. It does some work and returns the value. So that's actually how console.readline works. If you ever go work for the company, you can write your own functions like console.readline, right? So that's what we have here. That's the calculation, returns it. So let's hit play so you can sort of see it in action. First, let's convert 90, and that's the result. And let's convert it to 50, and that's the result. Of course, this means that anything that a function actually uses. So let's go in. So in this case, if I decided to return 100 for this one and return 200, it means whatever the user does, that is the value being returned, 100. So whenever I call that function, it would return 100. So it's really whatever you return is, so it doesn't matter if I enter 90, it's 100. It doesn't matter if I enter a large number, it's 100. Right? So that's what I mean by, in a function, whatever you return is the value that goes back to the user. Of course, you want to return a useful value, and that's why I am going to be returning, in this case, Fahrenheit, and in the other case, I'm going to return my Celsius. Right. Okay, so that is how to use functions and return a value. The last step really is can I not rely on module defined variables and have my function do all the work, right? And it's possible, right? So dim my Fahrenheit, of course my Celsius, and these are now functions, of course. And as I said before, functions have to return a value, right? And this also has to return, right? So we're going to use it very much like we would use mathematics. So here it is, but I'm just going to say what assign the value. Seems to be a lot of noise outside, sorry about that. Alright, so in this case I'm actually using my function Celsius to Fahrenheit. I'm passing it in, that's the parameter, passing it with a parameter, and immediately assigning. I don't need any variable in the middle. And I think as a programmer you want to get to this level where you can have things in there, right, and also be able to be able to return values from your functions, pass parameters, the values in the parameter. Now this is replacing the dim-dims. You're not doing dim-dims here. You actually have a variable that the user passes and the value is stored immediately into Celsius, and you can start using it. So this Celsius here is that parameter variable. Fahrenheit here is that parameter variable. Celsius here is going to be returned, and Fahrenheit here is going to be returned. And what this does is the code is very solid. Nobody can make Celsius do anything crazy. These two functions are self-contained, right? It means you can't really modify what's happening in there. You pass it. It's like a black box, and that's the ideal scenario for how you create modular robust code. It's a black box. You pass the data in, you get your result, right? You pass your data in, you get your result, and that's the way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to call this my second program. So console.out.writeLine. This is program functions version 2. Right, and of course remember you have to change the startup object if you have several modules. So let me run this, see what happens. Right, so this is my program function version 2, and do my first conversion, 90, 194. Of course the second one was 250, that was 121 point. So it's working really well, right? And that's actually taking us through how to use subroutines and a console, and to use functions and a console. Remember, functions return values, subroutines do not. There are two ways to get data to subroutines and functions. One way, we can actually use globally defined variables, right? Or we can use parameters. So we can use parameters like this one. So define it this way, meaning I call it opening close bracket, I pass what should be assigned, right? And of course subroutine doesn't return anything, but function returns data. Thank you very much. In the next one I'll show you how to use forms to accomplish the same thing.